Hey y'all, I have Brown here. So, had a bit of sad news. I found out yesterday that Albert Pyun, a movie maker whose work I've had a bit of a fascination with for a bit now, passed away last year in November. And he was 69 years old, and he was dealing with multiple sclerosis and dementia. So, I mean, I knew about the dementia part, but I didn't know about the multiple sclerosis. But yeah, it was just definitely a bummer to find that out. He's never been what one would call, say, a top-notch movie maker, but at the same time, I mean, he had a huge following in the B movie scene. I mean, if you're in any way, shape, or form a fan of B movies, then there's a strong chance that you've seen some of his work. But unfortunately, as his career went on, a lot of his movies were not good. Some of them were pretty lousy, I hate to say, but on the other hand, more towards the beginning of his career, he actually had some decent to good movies. And those movies in particular, you watched them and you could definitely see that there's that there was a certain artistic vision and voice that was just kind of struggling to be heard and so or seen, and you'd see some of that potential being realized, but unfortunately I guess it never went beyond the point of, say, the realm of B movies, because I was talking with one of my friends at work about this yesterday, just for a little bit, and we were talking about how he could have been he could have had a career trajectory similar to, say, someone like Sam Raimi, because Sam Raimi actually started off in B movies with the Evil Dead movies, but then he had a legitimately successful mainstream career as well. And I honestly think that if things had worked out differently, Albert Pyun could have had a similar career path. And it's a bummer that he didn't. I mean, on one hand, the trade-off being that the B movie scene would not be anywhere near as interesting without his involvement with it, but the guy had over 50 movies to his name, and like I said, unfortunately a lot of those movies were not that good, but at the same time though, the ones that were worthwhile definitely stood out. But yeah, it's just I remember that the first time I learned about him, it was back in college. I was going to junior college, Quad C, and there was this website called sci-film.org. Unfortunately, it's no longer in existence as far as I know, but it was a really cool website. And it basically talked about the movies, like it would give you some background info, the plot, what worked, what didn't, and what have you. And every now and then they would talk about, like, say, the DVD, special features, because this is when the DVD was considered the future, that kind of thing. But yeah, first time I found out about him, Albert Pyun, was when scifilm.org was covering The Sword and the Sorcerer, as well as Cyborg. And so I definitely became fascinated when I read about these movies, and some of the visuals were, especially The Sword and the Sorcerer, like some of the pictures I saw were pretty cool. And Cyborg I had seen when I was a kid, and I thought it was really cool, but then I saw it again when I was older, and I was kind of like, man, this sucks. But recently I had a chance to rewatch Cyborg on Blu-ray, and I was put in the awkward spot of having to eat my words, because it was actually not a bad movie. I mean, there were some bad parts in it, but at the same time, overall, it was actually a pretty solid movie. I mean, I'm not even joking here, and I'm not just saying that because Albert Pyun passed away. I mean, I'd come to that conclusion regardless. But I mean, ever since finding out about him, I just I was fascinated to learn more about his work, because if you go on internet forums that deal with B movies or just movie reviews in general, and Albert Pyun comes up, the consensus seems to be that either his one good movie was his very first movie, The Sword and the Sorcerer, or that his best phase in his career was towards that time period, towards the beginning of the career, like say from the 80s to early 90s, that kind of thing. But or as a couple of other people have put it, usually most filmmakers get better as their career goes on, but Albert Pyun seems to be in the camp of his films overall tended to decline in quality as his career went on, which is a bummer. But yeah, so I guess it started off as kind of morbid fascination, but then I actually saw, there was one of his movies that I found at this video store in Florida, and I remember it was this, it was like a youth group vacation thing that I got to go on, which was really cool. But there was a video store and they had Mean Guns. Now I'd heard about Mean Guns, but I had never seen it, and this was on DVD, and that was one of his movies, and it had Ice-T and Christopher Lambert in there. And I was asking one of the guys about it because I was telling him about how I'd learned about Albert Pyun, and the guy was like, yeah, Mean Guns was actually a pretty cool movie, and he told me a bit about it, and so I was like, okay, and so I went ahead and bought it. And when I watched it, I mean, yes, a very low budget movie, but at the same time, it was really cool. I mean, like, I would actually say it was a straight up good movie. And so I guess after reading about Sword and the Sorcerer and Cyborg, and plus some of the other stuff about his work in general, and then finally getting to see one of his movies, I guess at a point in time where I could appreciate it, for the B movie that it was, and still, appreciate that it was a good movie. I mean, it kind of made me, invested in trying to, learn more about his stuff. But, yeah, it's funny because, two of the movies that he's best known for, The Sword and the Sorcerer and the first Nemesis movie, for a time, as far as DVD goes, I mean, they were available as far as only bare bones releases, but the prices were outrageous. I remember that. Yeah, so it was one of those things where I lucked out and I found both a VHS copy of both Sword and the Sorcerer and Nemesis at a liquidation sale, back when I mean, once again, I was in college, and I was living with my folks at the time, and they had one of those TVs that was like VCR. It had a VCR and a DVD player. So, I watched both movies, and I mean, there were some cool moments here and there, but because I guess, the VHS, the copy was so old in both cases, I was just like, they were okay. I'm glad I got them for, a quarter each, as opposed to, the ridiculous amount that they want for the bare bones DVDs. And so fast forward several years later, as in very recently, The Sword and the Sorcerer and Nemesis were finally available on Blu-rays, or on Blu-ray, and both had special editions. And so in the Sword and the Sorcerer's case especially, they really cleared things up to where you could actually see what was going on, like it wasn't all murky and everything. So unfortunately, Nemesis still had the VHS quality, but at the very least they had some special features on there. So anyway, and a similar thing with Cyborg, saw it on Blu-ray, and that's where it was kind of like, man, this is actually a pretty cool movie, and way better than I remembered it being. And so no, it's funny though, because in a couple of cases, seeing, his work on Blu-ray has improved the experience immensely. Whereas in other cases, like say in the case of Dollman, it still looks like grainy VHS quality, although Dollman was still a fun movie. But anyway, though, yeah, it's been a very interesting, journey, getting to learn about him and seeing some of his work. And yes, unfortunately, he made lousy movies like say Alien from LA and the '90s version of Captain America with Matt Salinger, I think is how you say his name. Yeah, both pretty lousy movies. But on the other hand, though, you know, like I said earlier, when he was on, he actually made some decent to good movies. Like, I mean, you know, Sword and the Sorcerer and Cyborg are probably two of his best known, you know, decent to good ones, depending on who you're talking to. I mean, I honestly think that they're both decent movies. Not quite good, but still fun and, you know, entertaining and legitimately decent. On the other hand, you also have, you know, Radioactive Dreams, which unfortunately, at least as far as stateside goes, has yet to be released on DVD or Blu-ray. And so, you know, the only way that you can find it is if, you know, you hunt down a VHS copy, or, you know, if you watch it online. And thankfully, I was able to watch it on YouTube. And so, grainy VHS quality, but at the same time, it was, you know, I was still able to, you know, see what was going on, to where it's like, hey, it's a fun movie. So you had stuff like that. Then you also had movies like Dangerously Close and Mean Guns, and both of those were actually what I thought were legitimately good movies. I mean, still in the realm of B movies for sure, but at the same time, you know, the writing and acting, you know, were good to a point where you're like, you know, you really could get a glimpse of, you know, Albert Pyun, you know, maybe in another reality, having, you know, had a different career trajectory, you know, to where it's like, you know, you saw that he was capable of making legitimately good movies, even if, you know, at least in my opinion, you know, those are the only two legitimately good movies he made. On the other hand, he made, you know, more than a couple of decent movies. And so, you know, you saw that the talent was there, but unfortunately the majority of his output tended to not be so hot as, you know, time went on. But yeah, it just like I said, it's definitely been a fascinating journey, and it's definitely a loss to, you know, the film community and the B movie community especially. But I'm glad I, you know, got to learn about him and see some of his work, and I'm grateful that, you know, he was, you know, as much of a part of the B movie scene as he was, because like I said earlier, I mean, without him, the B movie scene honestly probably wouldn't be as interesting. But you know, if you want to see, at least from the movies that I've seen thus far, I mean, you know, some of the stuff I'd recommend were, of course, you know, The Sword and the Sorcerer, which is, I would highly recommend checking out the Blu-ray. Don't go for the VHS or the DVD, because in both cases, it's like, you know, the audio and visual quality are both kind of, you know, muddled and what have you, whereas the Blu-ray, it's much clearer, and you can actually, you know, enjoy the movie because you can see what's going on, you know. And plus, there's a, you know, ton of special features. So definitely The Sword and the Sorcerer for sure. And if you don't mind watching it on YouTube or some other, you know, website where you can watch, you know, something for free, Radioactive Dreams, that was a good one, or at least it was a fun one. Then of course you got Dangerously Close and Mean Guns, which, as I mentioned a bit ago, were, I honestly thought, you know, two movies they did that were legitimately good. And then of course, you know, you got Cyborg with Jean-Claude Van Damme, which once again, much better than I remembered it, especially after having seen it on Blu-ray. And a pretty cool apocalyptic movie. And then, of course, you have the first Nemesis movie. And I'm not going to say it was a good movie. And, you know, I struggled with, you know, trying to say, okay, is it a decent movie or just an okay movie? Because it had some really cool action scenes, and for a low budget, some very good special effects and makeup work. But unfortunately, the acting left a bit to be desired, you know, for sure. So it's like one of those things where, as far as Nemesis goes, you know, you had some really cool action scenes, but when the action scenes were happening, it was kind of like, ooh, yeah, we're stuck in a, you know, we're definitely in a B movie, you know, that kind of thing. So, I mean, at the very least, you know, if you're a B movie fan, definitely check out the first Nemesis movie, because, I mean, whether you think it's, you know, a decent, good, or just okay movie, it's definitely worth watching, you know, because, I mean, in terms of, like, the Cyborg stuff, that was actually pretty cool. And of course, Doll Man with Tim Thomerson. It was a Full Moon Pictures, a film. And while I remember on the Blu-ray, special features were pretty lousy. I mean, the movie itself is actually a fun movie. I mean, just bear in mind that the visual quality is very grainy and VHS-y. So, but yeah, those are the movies that I've seen that I can honestly say were decent to good, and if you, or at the very least worth checking out. And so if you want to see his work, or you want to see him as best, definitely check out those movies. But yeah, rest in peace, Albert Pyun. Thank you very much for your contribution to the film industry, and just the B movie scene in general. Definitely made it a far more interesting place. So best to his friends, family, and loved ones. Take care, and thank y'all for taking the time to check us out. And y'all have a good day. Bye.